Hello there and welcome to Network Africa with me, Cynthia, where we begin with an update in Tunisia concerning the attack on the museum. The country has opted to deploy the army to major cities and arrested 9 people after 20 foreign tourists were shot in an attack on a museum, which Islamic State militants called the first drop of the rain. Japanese, Italian, Spanish, and even British visitors, as well as 3 Tunisians, were among the victims of the attack, which took place in the heavily guarded parliament compound of a country largely spared the violent aftermath of the Arab Spring. Officials did not confirm the militants' claim of responsibility, but said they had identified 2 gunmen who were shot dead by the security forces and after the shootings which targeted tourist buses visiting the Bardo Museum on Wednesday. Now, following the gory incident in Tunisia, which left several foreigners killed, European Union leaders had agreed to increase cooperation with Tunisia following an Islamist attack on tourists in the capital this week, saying they would also offer more economic assistance to the new Arab democracy. In a statement agreed at an EU summit in Brussels, the leaders condemned the Tunis attack and expressed sympathy for the victims with neighbors Libya in chaos after a Western-backed revolt in 2011 and with military rulers back in power in Egypt. EU states are keen to bolster the elected authorities in Tunisia, where the Arab Spring protests for democracy began. Now, some 200 people gathered outside of the Tunisian embassy in Paris to show solidarity with Tunisia after gunmen opened fire on a museum in the capital. Demonstrators held banners that read solidarity with Tunisia and chanted slogans in support of the country. Japanese, Italian, Spanish, and British visitors, as we said earlier, were among the victims, as well as 3 Tunisians who were also killed in the process. Now, the Tunisian government says it has reason to believe that the 2 gunmen who attacked the museum on Wednesday were trained at a jihadist camp in Libya. The interior minister said the 2 men had been recruited at mosques in Tunisia and traveled to Libya in September. Both were killed in the attack in Bardo Museum in Tunis. On this attack and the steps taken afterward, I'm now being joined live via Skype from Washington, D.C. by the Voice of America's Jeffrey Young, who is a security expert. Jeffrey, thank you so much for speaking with us on Network Africa.
A pleasure, as always.
Now, I'd like to start by asking you if other African countries should be worried now that the threat of ISIS appears to be getting closer to home.
Let me respond to you in a philosophical way because I think it's really important. Any African state, or any nation for that matter, that does not provide adequate political and economic inclusion to all of its factions and all of its elements should be worried about the outbreak of insurgency primarily directed at the leaders and the institutions of state. As for the Islamic component in these groups, including Boko Haram in Nigeria, I continue to hold to my position that Islam is a tool used by those who control these insurgent groups to give themselves an air of legitimacy since they claim to act in the name of Islam. And by invoking Islam, provide a reward system for those who are willing to die on behalf of the cause. The perverse description of martyr for terrorists gives these actors glory and eternal life, at least according to the narrative that's been fed to them.
Now, what are your thoughts on the European Union meeting, to talk about the threats of ISIS both to Tunisia and Libya?
We are seeing both a reflection of Europe's colonial past and also a philosophy of better to solve it where it exists than allow it to seep into our own country. What I mean by this is, obviously, under the colonial system, there were people all over North Africa who were under the control of the French and other elements, and what we've seen in the last 50 years as colonialism ended and independence arose is these people moved into Europe. And they keep flooding more and more into Europe because there's a lack of economic opportunity and a lack of social and political advancement in their own North African countries. So what I want to go back to in the European summit is this. By helping Tunisia on its own soil, by helping its economy provide jobs and opportunity, by helping the structures of the government of Tunisia provide security and solidity within the country, they're helping to prevent an outbreak of fire on their own soil. So they're helping them, but they're helping themselves at the same time. Do you see that?
What about your thoughts on Libya being used as a training ground for the gunmen who carried out the massacre in Tunisia?
It's true there, as is true in other places. Terrorism thrives where states and the institutions of state are weak. Libya's central government does not have full control over that country and its territory, and that leaves wide areas where non-state actors, including terrorists such as the Islamic State, can set up and operate. Libya is also ridden by factionalism internally, which enhances the opportunity for terrorism to exist and to use Libya as a base for both internal and external insurgent operations. Sadly, for right now, a stable, unified, lawful Libya is not presently a fact. And that's why we're seeing Libya being used like this as a base for insurgency operations there and elsewhere.
Now finally, Jeffrey, any word of advice on how we could stop this threat from spreading beyond Libya and Tunisia?
I go back to what I have said again because it is so important. The only effective counter to factional violence and insurgency is engagement and inclusion of all segments of its population. This coupled with a robust, functional intelligence gathering operation that warns the state, warns the government of threats against it and how close those threats are, their imminence in terms of time and proximity. But that takes community engagement. In order for this intelligence to work, you have to have the support of the population. The people have to be able to tell the authorities, we know the bad guys are in our area. We know they're down the street. We know that they're in this building. We know that they're doing this, that, or the other. So it takes engagement. That's the only way intelligence really works. And it takes that, and as I said, inclusion to counter the threat of terrorism.
Jeffrey Young, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us again on Network Africa. Thank you. Now we'll take a quick break on the program. When we come back, airstrikes delay the arrival of Tripoli delegation, and we'll give you details on that story and more in a moment. Please stay with us.